All right, we have got some massive news in the MMA space that we're going to be reacting to today. And if it's massive news in the MMA space, it's obviously with the UFC. And the UFC has just signed a new rights deal. And it is not just any rights deal, it is a colossal rights deal. They have signed with Paramount Plus and through CBS for a 7-year, $7.7 billion deal. That is insane. And that is through a subscription base. So that means that it is going to be through a monthly subscription. So you're not paying for pay-per-views anymore, which is the biggest deal out of it all for the fans. But when it comes to paying monthly, you're only going to be paying about 120 to 150 USD instead of 1,000 to 1,300 USD for UFC events. So it is a massive win for UFC fans, and that is a pro that I'm going to get through soon. We're going to go through the pros and the cons of this rights deal, but they've now parted ways with ESPN mostly. Seems like they're still going to have certain things on there, especially with like UFC Fight Pass and their statistics, which I do believe they're going to have, but that's another thing that we're going to get into. But the fact that there's going to be no pay-per-views, it is massive for them signing with Paramount Plus. And it's actually funny that they have signed with Paramount Plus because it's actually gone full circle for them now in terms of their signings, because they started with Spike TV in the early 2000s and like the late 90s, which then turned into Viacom. And then Viacom became Paramount. Then they left them and they signed for Fox Sports. And then they left them and they've signed for ESPN. And now they've left ESPN and they're back with Paramount. So they're back where they started, and Dana White seems damn confident about it. And with the deal that they've been able to strike with that much money, I honestly cannot blame him. So let's kick it off with the pros of this media rights deal with Paramount Plus, and then we'll get into some of the cons that I do believe are going to come along with it. But firstly, with the pros, no more pay-per-views. I mean, the amount of money that the average viewers are going to be saving, it's literally going to be about $1,000 that people are saving for watching the UFC annually. That is a massive win for the UFC fans. And honestly, it's a massive change for the UFC as an organization, because they've had the pay-per-view format since 1993, but they are big enough at this point to warrant just going through a streaming service. They have a massive collected fan base. It's one of the fastest growing sports in the world, fastest growing organizations in the world, and going through Paramount Plus, it's only going to gain them more fans, to be honest, because they have people that just casually watch those subscription bases. They're going to see that it's a cheaper gate of entry. They're just going to be watching it. More casuals are going to be watching it, and through CBS network as well, that is more news based too. People are going to be clinging onto it from that. So honestly, I think it has been a really good deal for them to make. And I've got to say, the deal's honestly that good. It's even good for the bloody stream addicts. The stream addicts that don't want to pay a single cent and would rather chop their bloody arm off than pay for a pay-per-view. And honestly, it's good for them because they're only going from $0 to like $150 per year. And that's saving them from, you know, seeing the main event of UFC 300 and then it just cuts out and then they randomly see Jamal Hill on the floor unconscious. You know, they don't get to see the beautiful knockout. And that happens a lot with those streams. And I think $150 for the year, that's pretty warranted. And I think the streams are going to be dying with this, at least for the UFC, because you're saving like, honestly, $900 to $1,000. Granted, there's still going to be those religious meth streamers that are going to be like, there's no way I'm paying a cent for a sport. So they're going to still watch it. But most of those guys that are watching the streams, they're going to be moving over to this subscription basis. And it's going to be really interesting in terms of the way they format it, because Dana did mention in the CBS interview that they're going to have like 4 big events happening per year. And he did double down on the White House card on the 4th of July. So I assume that that's like the big event, and then they're going to have another 3 of them. So I'm not too sure if that's just going to be like stacked cards, or if they're going to have like more things like the Sphere, if they're going to have more things in, you know, other places that we haven't seen before, and they're going to make a massive events like the Santiago Bernabeu or something like that for Ilia Topuria in Spain. There's a lot of things they could do, but with the amount of money that's being injected, oh my goodness, they have a lot of resources now, because the ESPN deal, for reference, was around like 100 million-ish for like their 6 to 7 year deal, I believe it was. to now having a $7.7 billion deal over a 7-year period. That's $1.1 billion that they have to utilize within a calendar year. That is over 10xing what they had per year in the ESPN rights deal. So imagine the stuff that they could be pulling out with the amount of money that's been injected into this new rights deal. It's honestly unfathomable, but hopefully it's going to mean more positive changes for fighter pay. And that really needs to happen because on the other side, which now we're going to be looking into the cons list, is that there's no pay-per-view points for fighters. The fact that pay-per-view is gone is incredible for fans, but can be worrisome for fighters because with no pay-per-view points for fighters, there could be a chance that there could be less money for them if the UFC isn't garnering more of a fan base, which I do think they will because they're just going to gain more media coverage through Paramount to just get more money and also through CBS as a news network and a sports network. So I don't think that there's going to be much of a concern there, but it's just going to be interesting to see how they scale it. And another thing that I am concerned about when it comes to the UFC pushing more media, I think that's where I'm a bit more concerned because if they have such a low paywall, it means that their promotional efforts, I believe, that their promotional efforts aren't going to be as strong. And I do think that the card quality is susceptible to decline because if they don't need to shell out these massive media rants and just these big trailers and everything to cover that pay-per-view cost, because they need people to be attracted to the pay-per-view through the trailers, through all the interviews and stuff, because the pay-per-view is such a high paywall. But going into this streaming service, I mean, it's so cheap. Do they really need to warrant all these big, massive trailers and ordeals and everything? I mean, we've already seen the UFC kind of go on the decline when it comes to announcements for starters. I mean, they used to have massive trailers. I remember the one with Conor McGregor and Jose Aldo. They were in the street and they had this massive trailer of them walking towards each other. And now we've just got Dana White just randomly announcing fights with no enthusiasm whatsoever. And I feel like that could just get worse. That could just get worse when it comes to the promotional efforts, when it comes to their card not needing to have all these big promotional parts behind it because it's so cheap. Why do they need to justify making these massive cards and also having these big, fancy trailers and all their embedded series, all this, that, the other? They don't necessarily need to justify it. And a big thing with that is if they don't, which is something they need to recognize, because they can't go back to a pay-per-view system. If they go back to a pay-per-view system after they've just done this deal, they can't just go back and ask the fans to pay an extra $1,000 again. They will lose so many fans if this does occur. And they've got till 2032, but they just simply can't go back after that unless it's somehow plummeting and they just have to go back and see if they can just survive. But that's not going to happen. The UFC is just growing like crazy. It grows and grows year after year. So it is going to be interesting to see what does happen with that when it comes to the promotional efforts and to see if they really do stick with the subscription basis and if they don't increase the prices of the subscription basis after a couple months, or to see how it goes after a couple years, because they might increase the pricing just to see if they can justify getting away with it, to be honest, because it is such a great deal at the moment. Fans aren't going to be going away even if they do increase the price. I mean, that's what happened with pay-per-views and they weren't really losing fans that much. But the real reason as to why they were losing fans is because of the card quality declining. That's why. But now looking at the ESPN side of things, I mean, it's a bit tricky because I find with ESPN, I did like their deal, especially when it came to the work that ESPN put in, especially with their interview efforts and also with their statistics that they made. They've actually got a lot of good statistics on their app and their page that I've utilized a lot of the time, especially for prediction-based stuff, and hoping that that doesn't really go away, or if Paramount is taking over in CBS, that they have a format where they can display statistics and everything accurately and go in depth with those statistics, like fighters fighting out of a certain stance and, especially putting in leg reach and high volume and all that stuff, because that's extremely important. Making sure that fans can actually access that stuff, especially when making predictions. that needs to stay, and they need to formulate that if they're going through Paramount Plus or CBS and they're going away from ESPN. But where it's a little bit tricky that I just don't really understand when it comes to it is in terms of a promotional effort. The UFC is under TKO, and TKO is still with ESPN for WWE, and there's still PFL under ESPN as well. So it's very tricky in terms of what's going to happen with that, and if they're still going to be technically tied to the UFC because it's under TKO. And also, if the UFC is completely branching away from ESPN for good, is that going to mean that the PFL is going to lose their ESPN rights because the ESPN just doesn't want like the second-rate, MMA organization? Or is it going to boost them up because ESPN just has certain accesses that is just going to boost them even more, and they're not necessarily competing with the UFC within the same media company? So it's going to be interesting to see. We don't have a lot of information overall, but there are some pros, there are some cons. I think as a fan, inherently, it is a massive positive. I am looking forward to it. For fighters, it's going to be very interesting. There's going to be a lot of slander if fighter pay doesn't go up, especially with those media rights deals, but it's going to have to really just show that there's going to be an injection of new fans for them to justify giving more money to the UFC fighters. And it's just going to be interesting more so at the top range, the higher echelon, where those fighters getting pay-per-view points, how it looks in terms of them getting more money, because they obviously have to be benefited. They have to be treated to the standard that they are. They have to be given money for a standard of a card, like a number card. They have to replace the pay-per-view points with something, because that's the incentive that they need. And also, I've got to touch on, it's not necessarily a con. I'm kind of done with the cons, but I don't know exactly what's going to happen with like the Ultimate Fighter, like Dana White's Contender Series, Road to the UFC. Like with the ESPN deal in there, are they still going to be attached to ESPN and we watch it through that, or Fight Pass exclusively? Or are they going to be through Paramount Plus as well? Because here's the summary. We've got the 7-year media deal that starts in 2026 and goes through to 2032. And we've got 43 fight cards per year, which 13 of them are numbered events and then 30 of them are fight nights. But that doesn't talk about other events like your Dana White's Contender Series and Ultimate Fighter. That only talks about the original pay-per-views and the fight night events. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens there. And when it comes to those select events, are they going to be specifically through like CBS, or are they going to be through Paramount Plus? And what happens with those number cards? Are they, or like the big events like the White House event, are they going to be through Paramount Plus, or are they going to be through CBS? There's just not a lot of information here, but the most important thing of all as a takeaway is that they've moved away from the pay-per-view format and they've gone to the subscription-based service. So massive for the fans, going to be interesting for the fighters. And I think overall for the UFC, it's a great deal for the injection of funds that they're getting into that organization. So they have no excuse to not give us amazing shows with that money injection. That's my take on it. We've got some good pros. We do have some identifiable cons that haven't been cleared up yet, but I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say about the media rights deal. Definitely leave a comment below and let me know what you think. But I really hope you enjoyed this reactions video. Please like, comment, subscribe. It goes a long way for the channel, and I will catch you in the next one.